D.C. public relations firm to run cover for its problematic conduct during this year's election. In defending Dominion, spokesman Michael Steele says Dominion is funded by American capitalists. He calls it an American company. But Dominion president and CEO John Paulus is a Canadian citizen, and he told Congress in January he owns 12% of the company. 75% of Dominion is owned by Staple Street Capital, a private equity firm run by former managers of the Carlyle Group. No other investor owns more than 5%, we're told, but Dominion will not tell us who they are or who is behind Dominion. Joining us tonight by phone is Sidney Powell, defense attorney for General Michael Flynn, former federal prosecutor herself, and a great American. Sidney, great to have you with us. Let's start with the ownership of these voting firms. I know you're focusing on that part of the electoral fraud that's been perpetrated this year in this election. Why don't we know who they are?
Well, because they've used multiple shell companies and now apparently private equity groups to hide their actual ownership. But there's no doubt that the software was created and used in Venezuela to control the elections and make sure that Hugo Chavez was always reelected as the dictator of Venezuela in what appeared to be, quote, free and fair elections, end quote. But they were manipulated by the software used in the Dominion machines and used by other machines in the United States, frankly. And we're just continuing to be inundated by evidence of all the frauds here and every manner and means of fraud you could possibly think of.
I think many Americans have given no thought to electoral fraud that would be perpetrated through electronic voting. That is, these machines, these electronic voting companies, including Dominion, prominently Dominion, at least in the suspicions of a lot of Americans. We don't even know who has actually seen this software work. We don't know where their servers are for sure. We know a couple of them are overseas, and by overseas I mean in Germany and Spain. It's just stunning that we have progressed this far with these companies and have permitted these entities that we don't know what their ownership is, we don't know what their possible bias is. How could this be?
Because of all the corruption in the country, we need to find a way to follow the money back as far even as when this was approved by the special government committee called CFIUS, CFIUS, which are the heads of the respective agencies at the time who approved Dominion coming into the country and running our elections. And, I mean, Carolyn Maloney and Klobuchar and Warren have been raising Cain about this issue for a long time.
Right.
But nobody's done anything about it.
And as last year.
Yeah, and as best I can tell, both parties have any number of people who are at fault in the fact this has continued to play any role in our elections whatsoever, and we have no idea of who all has benefited from it. Somebody needs to do a massive money following investigation to find out who paid what to whom. Well,
you have promised a Kraken will be unleashed. We were expecting perhaps your suit would be filed yesterday or today. When shall we expect your lawsuit?
Well, I think no later than tomorrow. It's just going to be it's a massive document, and it's going to have a lot of exhibits.
And who will be the defendant or defendants?
The defendants are going to be folks in Georgia who are responsible for supposedly making sure the elections in Georgia are done properly. And there are just countless incidents of voter fraud and election fraud writ large in Georgia.
In Georgia, are you planning any other suits beyond Georgia?
Yes, we are. We'll be rolling them out as fast as we possibly can because it affected the entire country, actually. We even have an affidavit now from a distant state that's done by one of the election officials in the state, telling us all the things that person witnessed as being wrong there. So it was nationwide.
Well, the number of affidavits is voluminous now. The eyewitnesses are considerable. Your thoughts now about what will be the impact, and can it be adjudicated in such a way as to meet all of the deadlines that are forced upon you? That is December 8th, December 14th. Give us your sense of the timing and the urgency of getting this to resolution.
Yes, well, obviously it couldn't be more urgent. But yes, the time deadlines should be able to be met, and the evidence is so overwhelming, it's almost as though they were so blatant about it, they expected us to catch it, and, maybe it's a diversion from something else that's going on. I don't know, but it's also clear that there was foreign intrusion into our voting systems, and that's going to be where the rubber meets the road.
A person that I hold in high regard, who's been at various points in this political conflict over the last 4 years, said the difference this year in the political corruption and the pervasive nature of it is that he believes the left doesn't even care. The radical Dems, the deep state, don't even care whether we find out what we know. And I thought about it, and I think that may be well considered. Your thoughts?
Yes, I agree. I mean, that's exactly how blatant it is, and all kinds of it are equally blatant. I mean, people sitting on the floor and writing on the side of buses, filling out ballot after ballot. It's in your face everywhere. The statistical evidence is insurmountable. The mathematical evidence is to mathematical impossibilities. There's no way there was anything but widespread election fraud here. We've got one witness that says in Arizona, at least, there were 35,000 votes added to every Democratic candidate just to start their voting off. It's like getting your $500 of Monopoly money to begin with when you haven't done anything. And it was only for Democrats.
Do you think that we're going to see the Trump presidency saved?
Yes, I definitely do. There's no issue in my mind but that he was elected in an absolute landslide nationwide.
Sidney Powell, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. Thanks so much. Up next, former Defense Secretary James Mattis. He spouted off again. We're not quite sure what his sense of timing is in these things, but he can be, he's somewhat predictable. This time slamming the president's policy that he was appointed to enforce. That and more, we'll be talking with national security expert Jim Hansen. He's our guest here next. Stay with us. Former Defense Secretary Jim Mattis raising his head once again and urging the Biden administration, if ever there is to be one, to erase President Trump's America First policy and replace it with a policy of cooperation. President Trump responded tweeting this: "That says it all about Mattis. Obama fired him. I should have fired him sooner. Did best work after he was gone. World's most overrated general," as he has called him on more than one occasion. Joining us tonight is Jim Hansen, former U.S. Army Special Forces, president of the Security Studies Group, a national security and foreign policy think tank. Jim, good to have you with us. Jim Mattis doesn't like the idea of putting America first. What in the world does a general think about who doesn't think about America first?
Yeah, General Mattis is a true patriot, and God bless him. But he's a perfect example of the type of outstanding battlefield commander who has no idea about geostrategy or foreign policy. And he probably should stop talking about it. And I think the problem President Trump had was when he was working for him, he was trying to slow down the president's agenda. And once he left, as the president said, we got the first Arab-Israeli peace accords in dozens of years. We got North Korea pacified. We put China on their heels. And Qasem Soleimani and al-Baghdadi ended up dead. America first is what America needs, and General Mattis should probably stick to the things he was good at and write another memoir about the war, not foreign policy.
And foreign policy is very much on the minds of all Americans who are watching what this battle for the White House play out, as we see the foreign policy team that former Vice President Biden wants to assemble should he be elected. They're talking about China, the middle road with them. There is no reason to be competitive or concerned, despite their expansionary and bellicose policy positions and rhetoric.
And the problem with Joe Biden is he has always fundamentally misunderstood China. Now, maybe it had something to do with all the money he was helping Hunter haul out of there in their Biden corruption. But the problem is China is not an ally. They are our enemy. They are our main foe on the world stage. And if you capitulate and cringe in front of them and kowtow to their policies, you do America and the world no good. And that's the problem. Joe Biden could not be trusted, nor could his retread Obama foreign policy team be trusted to make good deals for the United States. They would be a nightmare.
Well, speaking of nightmares, and that is what the prospects, the possibilities along the border between China and India, and the recent reconnaissance imagery showing a buildup of Chinese military right there at the border. To what purpose, we could easily imagine. Your thoughts about how serious that looks like it's becoming?
It's extremely serious because it's not that common for the Chinese to move troops around. They like to do a lot of maritime expansion. They like to draw new lines on the maps in the ocean, and they've done some work building up islands. But the fact that they're actually on the ground near India during a time where there's a lot of already internal conflict in India about Kashmir does not bode well, and is a pretty bellicose reaction from them that I think we have to take seriously. They're not helping things, and I think they're trying to take advantage of the chaos here to push their agenda.
If there were to be a Biden administration, how concerned are you about Asia?
I'm concerned about Asia in a huge way, and most of the rest of the world as well, because the problem is Joe Biden as a globalist and his team of Obama, foreign policy gurus who all come from the America Last school of foreign policy are going to put us behind the 8 ball. We actually had 4 years where President Trump put the Chinese on their heels. He actually pushed back against the expansion they're doing and gave our allies a reason to think things could get better. That would go right out the window and China would take right back over. And I think everybody needs to worry about that because we rely on the Chinese supply chains coming our way for far too much of the important stuff like medical supplies that we need.
Jim Hanson, always good to have you with us. We appreciate it. Thanks so much. Up next, the American people overwhelmingly call for electoral reform in the wake of this year's presidential election. Just the News founder and its editor-in-chief, John Solomon, joins us here next. And order my new book, The Trump Century, available now at the LouDobbsShop.com. That's LouDobbsShop.com. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Breaking news now, New York governor demands New Yorkers limit their Thanksgiving gatherings to 10 people and orders some sheriffs in the state are refusing to enforce. Listen to those sheriffs who dare to defy Andrew Cuomo and his China virus restrictions this holiday season.
I don't consider them a law enforcement officer because you don't have the right to pick laws that you think you will enforce, and you don't enforce laws that you don't agree with. That's not a law enforcement officer. That's a dictator.
He's sort of in a tough spot, isn't he? Well, a new Just the News poll finds voters overwhelmingly support election reform. At least 70% of the poll's respondents supporting purging voter rolls of those who don't belong on them, only counting mail-in ballots received by Election Day, reporting all votes on election night, and having poll observers from both parties present at all times. What a good idea. Joining us tonight is John Solomon. He's editor-in-chief of Just the News and best-selling author as well. John, good to have you here.
Great to be with you, Lou.
It's obvious that Rudy Giuliani and his team are working against a tremendous set of deadlines here, and Sidney Powell, the same for her, which she acknowledged here on the broadcast. This is tough stuff.
It is.
Sidney is very confident that the president is going to prevail. Your thoughts?
Listen, the clock is ticking. The key for the legal team is to get beyond the constitutional legal arguments, which a lot of legal scholars say they've met the threshold for the argument. The key is to provide the sort of proof that would convince a judge that the irregularities, the rule changes, the questionable balance would overcome any lead in at least 3 of the states where Joe Biden is currently listed as leading. And I think that's the challenge, is to come up with mathematical and evidentiary arguments that say, listen, if these things didn't happen, President Trump probably would have won the state. And I think that's what people are working to do very quickly. Today, very significant lawsuit action filed in Wisconsin by the Amistad Project. That's a state where only 20,000 votes separate Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The Amistad Project put out mathematical and other evidence showing that there could be as many as 150,000 votes that were fraudulent or improperly counted, improperly filed. That's the sort of mathematical evidence I think the courts have been looking for. Now they'll have to adjudicate, does it make sense? Do we believe it? Is it strong enough for a court to intervene in an election? But that's, I think, the challenge for the legal team. They've got to show a scope of misconduct, a scope of fraud that would have overtaken the lead had these things not occurred.
And that evidence, statistically, mathematically, however you wish to express it, it falls on the same line as any other circumstantial evidence, only with considerably more power, given the bent, if you will, for science these days in mathematics, one would think.
Sure.
I don't hear a lot of people on the left paying attention to these minuscule possibilities that this vote could have been carried out in a half dozen states, the way in which that vote unfolded.
Yeah, well, listen, there are the theoretical mathematical analyses, which are very compelling, right? They just show an anomaly that the chances of which are very slight to have occurred. But in real terms, there are really strong pieces of evidence that incorrect things happen, misconduct happened. In Detroit, you've got a city worker who swears that she was instructed and saw thousands of ballots being altered. In Wisconsin, 250,000 people were allowed to vote by skipping voter ID rolls because they were allowed to be called shut-ins during COVID. There are really concrete things that have happened that affected large numbers of votes. Beyond the mathematical analyses, in each state, you go to what Lynn Wood filed in Georgia, you've got these eyewitnesses saying, we saw thousands and thousands of pristine ballots being counted for Joe Biden, meaning these are ballots that were allegedly came out of envelopes, but they weren't folded. Those sort of things are very compelling, and they are large in scope, at least as described by the affidavits and the witnesses. And so when you combine the mathematical, theoretical anomalies of the election with real eyewitness testimony and accounts, you get a sense that, something did happen, and it's going to be up to the courts. Will the courts have the courage to say that what we see as evidence is strong enough for us to intervene and overturn the vote count? It's a big ask of the courts. It's a big job for the Trump team, but I don't think it's impossible.
And Rudy Giuliani pointing out they have eyewitnesses, they have affidavits, they have evidence in case the national left-wing media were to ever be sincere about their request to see that very offering. It's going to be interesting to see how many of what have been heretofore politically corrupt judiciaries, see how many judges really want to see the evidence. We'll find out. John Solomon, terrific reporting on the Biden camp's choice for administration, particularly national security members of such at this point hypothetical administration. I urge everyone to go to Just the News and to read your excellent reporting as always. We're out of time here tonight, John. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. Up next, Michigan's Attorney General. She's done it again, finally ready to investigate threats made against Republicans. We take that up and more with attorney Phil Klein here next. Stay with us. Imagine investigating threats against Republicans. What a move for the Michigan AG. We'll be right back. A record-setting day on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial's up 455 points, surpassing 30,000 for the first time in history. The S&P also hitting a record close, up 58 points. The Nasdaq up 156 points. Volume on the big board picking up to 6.3 billion shares. Crude oil gaining 4%. It's now at $44.81 a barrel. And listen to my reports on the Salem Radio Network, Mondays through Friday. Michigan's radical dim Attorney General Dana Nessel says her office will investigate the threats made against Republicans on the Wayne County Board of Canvassers. It took a number of days for her to figure that out. One of those canvassers, Monica Palmer, told us last week on this broadcast that she received graphic threats, violent threats, including threats against her children. The Amistad Project, headed by attorney Phil Klein, filing a new lawsuit in Wisconsin last night. The lawsuit alleging there were almost 157,000 illegal votes cast in that state, and they should be tossed. The lawsuit claims that votes were cast by people who didn't reside in Wisconsin, people who voted twice, and by voters who avoided the Wisconsin voter ID laws. Joe Biden won the state of Wisconsin, says the board, by just over 20,000 votes. Well, joining us tonight is the man leading the Amistad Project, Phil Klein. He's the director, and we are delighted, Phil, to have you with us. And I want to say, first of all, it's my understanding that you file suits now in 6 states. Is that correct?
Yes, we are in the process. We already have suits in 6 states, but we're filing more based on this new data.
And this new data is?
What we've put together is a series of decisions at the local level, by the way, funded and encouraged by the flow of $350 million of Mark Zuckerberg monies that allowed for the infusion of these questionable or fraudulent ballots into the stream to be counted. And the analysis through using government data, Lou, and then calling out to voters and asking them about their behavior, getting them to sign affidavits, is that in each one of these swing states, there are hundreds of thousands of votes in question, as you mentioned in Wisconsin. And in addition to the ballots you mentioned in Wisconsin, we've identified over 12,000 Republicans who voted whose votes were not counted according to the state's data. So what you had is $350 million coming in, the creation of all this Dropbox, consolidated counting centers in the urban core around the nation, Zuckerberg money paying the election judges and officials inside the rooms, and then Republicans in America kicked out of the counting room. And that can't stand and should not stand as a fair and integral election.
It is stunning how the left in this country has suddenly acquiesced, forgotten its responsibility, and is now ignoring these billionaire oligarchs, most of them from Silicon Valley and social media, big tech, who are trying desperately to take over this election and manipulate it. We heard the testimony of Dr. Robert Epstein again this summer, and now he's confirming that what he said is happened, that there was an effort by Google to sway the vote. And they succeeded, at the very least, to the tune of 6 million voters. Your thoughts about the role of money here and what has to be done to stand up to that kind of corrupt influence?
Well, you said it, Lou, oligarchs. And there's two things that you need to do to control the country. You want to control the flow of information. Check. All the censorship, what Google did, and then you want to control the way a country selects its leaders. And that's really the unspoken story to the American people. Mark Zuckerberg's monies alone matched the federal government appropriation for elections this year. $400 million. Google also gave money to this effort. And we now have evidence pursuant to court order that they turn it over because they don't want to share this information with the American people. We have evidence that they actually told local election officials how to manage the election in these core Democrat areas where you see all the problems. That was Zuckerberg and a group called the Center for Tech and Civic Life telling them what to do. And I give you this thought. They told America we needed to consolidate counting centers. For COVID, we're going to create a crowd to protect us from COVID. That makes no sense.
Right.
The reason they did it,
well, so much doesn't.
Republicans to see, and they wanted to infuse fraudulent ballots, and they did it.
Phil, I want to ask you as we're wrapping, because we heard from Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House, and the man who most people hold responsible for the Republicans losing control of the House in 2018, talking about how it's not good to question our elections and the lack of integrity in them because it just destroys our faith in democracy. I want to just hear what you think about suspending critical judgment when it comes to our electoral system. We got about 30 seconds. I'd just like to get your reaction.
Sure, I've never investigated anybody who wanted me to investigate them, but I would add this. You and I remember, Lou, the hanging Chads and the dimpled Chads because we were in the counting room. America has the right to be in the counting room. They boarded up the windows and kicked us out, and they put a billionaire in there. And we have to investigate why.
Phil Klein is doing just that, investigating. And Phil, we thank you very much for being with us. Look forward to talking to you soon and wish you all the very best of luck in court. Stay with us. We're coming right back.